computer, and we are filming the Russian Revolution in the background, a documentary, which is being overlaid by the right to be greedy, theses on the practical necessity of demanding everything. This is an audiobook recording for audioteachers.com. What up, Mark Hood? Egoism in its narrowest sense is a tautology, not a tactic. Adolescents of all ages who triumphantly trumpet that everyone is selfish as if they'd made a factual discovery about the world only show that they literally don't know what they're talking about. Practical egoism must be something more. It must tell the egoist something useful about himself and other selves which will make a difference in his life, and as it happens, theirs. My wants, needs, desires, whims, call them what you will, extend the ego, which is myself purposively acting out where the other selves await me. If I deal with them, as the economists say, at arm's length, I can't get as close as I need to for so much of what I want. At any rate, no spook, no ideology is going to get in my way. Do you have ideas? Or do ideas have you? Van Hip, Kirsten geh kachen lichtigen dein Eugen. Okay, so the contents of this book are Chapter 1, Wealth. Chapter 2, Individualism and Collectivism. Chapter 3, the Dialectic of Egoism. 4, The Resonance of Egoisms. 5, Communist Society. 6, Radical Subjectivity. 7, Pleasure. 8, Sexuality. 9, Authority. 10, Morality. 11, Revolution. Postnotes, citation, notes, appendix, preamble. Introduction. Greed in its full sense is the only possible basis of communist society. That's thesis number 1. Number 2. The present forms of greed lose out in the end because they turn out not to be greedy enough. Hyun Craig Rim. Hyun! Come on, Hyun. Jeremy, thank you for joining us. It is July 5th, 9:46 a.m. Central Standard Time. We've made it through the first 2 theses of the right to be greedy, theses on the practical necessity of demanding everything. This has been an audiobook recording for audioteachers.com. Again, this has been an audiobook recording for audioteachers.com. Go to www.audioteachers.com. Shout out to our sponsor, marijuanabusiness.com. Without marijuanabusiness.com, this recording would be impossible. We can't thank our sponsors enough, and we urge all our listeners to go to www.marijuanabusiness.com. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Go to marijuanabusiness.com. Thank you so much. Three. The repression of egoism can never totally succeed except as the destruction of human subjectivity. The extinction of the human species itself, because egoism is an essential moment of human subjectivity. Its repression simply means that it returns in a hidden, duplicitous form. If it cannot show itself in the open market, it will find itself or create for itself a black market. If it is not tolerated in transparent relations, the repressed self will split into a represented self, a personal organization of appearances, a persona, and that which cringes and plots behind this character armor. The repression of egoism, contrary to the dictates of every one of the so-called communists in opposition to Marx and Engels, from Lenin right down to Mao, can never be the basis of communist society. Moreover, the repressive conception of communism misses precisely the whole point. It misses out on the validity of the egoistic moment. This is true even in the inverted form in which it emerges from an imminent critique of altruistic ideology. If I die, the world dies for me. Without life, I cannot love another. However, what it misses in theory, in its ideological representations, it nonetheless preserves in practice. and precisely with the help of that very ideology. Its real basis is the egoism of the state capitalist bureaucracy. This ideology of self-sacrifice serves admirably the task of extracting surplus labor from the proletariat. The actual negation of narrow egoism is a matter of transcendence, of Hebung, of the transition from a narrow to a qualitatively expanded form of egoism. The original self-expansion of egoism was identically the demise of the primitive community, but its further self-expansion will resolve itself into a community once again. It is only when greed itself at last, or rather once again, beckons in the direction of community that the direction will be taken. Here the ancient Christian truth that no earthly force can withstand human greed rejoins us on the side of the barricades. Thesis number 4. Mary Noonan! Oh my god, I'm graced with the presence of a Noonan. That big, magnificent Christmas tree extending 2 floors in a house! What opulence! Oh, you have such lovely brothers. It was the struggle over the growing wealth which rent asunder the early tribal and village communities. The elaboration of the patriarchal pattern, the growth of exchange relations, of usury, debt, slavery, and war can all be traced to this. It is only when the same motive which originally occasioned this dissolution of community calls for its reconstitution that the community can be constituted again. And this motive is simply the struggle for a richer life. For only that motive is irresistible, only that motive, greed, can undo its own work. It is only when that same subjective moment, through the historical deepening of its own possibility, turns against its own present objectification. In a word, capital. Capital is private property, private appropriation, that is, privatization, exclusion, society as an association of strangers, of estrangement, in short, the totality of alienation. That the threshold of the great transformation is reached, in the struggle of this new subjectivity against the previous objectification, global capitalist society, in a word, capital. The process of the negation of that objectification is the communist revolution. 5. We have no doubt that people are corruptible. But we know for ourselves that there are things more tempting, more seductive than money, capital, and power. So much so that no genuinely greedy human being could possibly resist their allure, and it is upon this corruptibility of man that we found our hopes for revolution. Revolution is nothing other than the self-accelerating spread throughout society of this more profound corruption, of this deeper seduction. Currently, greed is always pursued and associated with isolation and privatism, simply because everyone under the reign of capital is condemned to pursue greed in this narrow way. Greed doesn't yet know its own potentiality. We say once again, the present forms of greed lose out in the end because they turn out not to be greedy enough. Six. Narrow greed is a holdover from times of natural scarcity. Its desires are represented to itself in the form of commodities, power, sex objects, and even more abstractly as money and as images. We are told in 1,000 ways that only these few things are worth having, by rulers who work to ensure that these are the only things available to be bought. The survival of narrow greed, in a word, of potential plenty, is propagated in the form of ideology by those very people who control access to these things. Ultimately, in our daily lives, we suffer the humiliation of being forced accomplices in the maintenance of this scarcity, this poverty of choice. Narrow greed will turn against itself. No more powerful weapon against greed could possibly be found than greed itself. There could be no more formidable tool for transforming narrow selfishness than this selfishness itself. In its own process, through its own development, it must discover a fuller form of greed, and a richer form of wealth. It must discover its own narrowness.